Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Track 8, a session on how protection of intellectual property rights is key to drug development and innovation. My panelists are Dr. Godfrey Mutobi-Kele and Professor Kelly Chibale, and I invite you to join me in giving them a warm welcome. The Innovative Pharmaceutical Association of South Africa, IPASA, represents 26 international companies that develop, make, and sell new medicines, devices, and vaccines that help people to live longer and more fulfilled lives. We innovate in response to unmet patient needs when we develop new treatments. We also support innovative solutions to our country's most pressing healthcare challenges. My name is Bada Pharasi, the Chief Executive Officer of IPASA. To kick off this session, I find it apt to quote briefly from our World Health Organization publication entitled "An Integrated Health, Trade, and Intellectual Property Approach to Respond to the COVID-19 Pandemic." And I quote, "The coronavirus disease 2019 constitutes an extraordinary global public health crisis. It has created a pressing need for intensified global cooperation. The pandemic has, from its outset, raised issues at the crossroads of public health policy, trade policy, and the framework for and the management of innovation, including those related to intellectual property rights. The global IP system provides an incentive framework in which urgently needed innovation in relation to COVID-19 can be encouraged. It covers the stages from invention to supply of a product or service. Well-functioning IP systems should consider the interests of a wide range of stakeholders, such as startups, research and development institutions, both public and private, universities and corporations, as well as the interests of funders, whether public or private, and of the public at large, including patients who ultimately benefit from innovation that meets their needs. To achieve this delicate balance, each country can tailor its domestic IP system to its particular needs and circumstances, including through TRIPS flexibilities, and carefully navigating through what can and what cannot be done. In the midst of all of this, we have seen concerted efforts aimed at having a waiver imposed on the intellectual property for COVID-19 vaccines, in the belief that this would be the best way to secure access to COVID-19 vaccines, therapies, and diagnostics. But is this the way to proceed? Suffice it to say that as IPASA, we note how the international intellectual property system has given companies confidence to engage in more than 200 technology transfer agreements to expand delivery on COVID-19 vaccines based on unprecedented partnerships between vaccine manufacturers in industrialized countries and those in developing countries. We have had ample evidence presented today and yesterday of the enormous amount of goodwill that is in existence to ensure Africa's future as a hub of pharmaceutical innovation is assured. More than the goodwill, we will be hearing in this session about practical measures developed to support country readiness and optimize production of much needed vaccines and therapies on the African continent. Let's start with you, Dr. Kele. You currently serve as the head government affairs and policy at IPASA, but you have also had immense experience in researching and developing policies in South Africa and elsewhere on the continent on improving drug development. Can you outline to us what are the policy instruments developed by the South African government over the years aimed at promoting the knowledge economy and boosting innovation as a key driver to improve industrial performance and to boost global competitiveness? Can you please unpack that policy framework? Are there any gaps? What are they? What needs to be done to ensure South Africa becomes a true hub of innovation and drug development?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. All protocol observed. It gives me great pleasure to share thoughts with you this afternoon on matters related to innovation. So the title of my presentation is an examination of policies aimed at bringing local innovations to market. And the crux of the matter relates that creates a barrier between us as South Africans with excellent research facilities being unable to get the innovations that takes place in our various institutions to the market. So where do we go wrong from getting the way to the last mile? That's pretty much what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. To frame the discussion, colleagues that wish to get into a global discourse on development as it relates to the global goals for sustainable development. At this point in time, the whole world is battling with a crisis that spans economy as well as health. The advent of the coronavirus, the outbreak. It does make sense, therefore, to trace our steps in terms of how we ourselves out of this challenge that we have. The Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for global discourse in development gives us such a grand plan on how we can move forward. And I wish to explore at least 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals that are pertinent to the discussion we're having today. Those being SDG number 3, good health and well-being. We do indeed need to very quickly pull out of the pandemic that that we're grappling with, that has led us to losing many loved ones. At the same time, Sustainable Development Goal number 8 talks about decent work and economic growth. We all appreciate the havoc that the pandemic has wreaked on our various economies. A whole lot of people have lost their jobs. The economy is not growing. Of course, as South Africa, we've got a national development plan that we know that we ought to be growing the economy at 5% annually to realize the goals that we want to achieve by 2030. And we all can appreciate that we are not there at the moment. The economy is growing far lesser than it ought to be growing. And that immediately poses a threat to our lofty goals of achieving a much better South Africa by 2030. I also wish to highlight a pertinent goal in terms of the SDGs, that being industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So the topic for today, we are talking about innovation. What is it that is stopping the innovations from South Africa to reach global markets with the retention of residual value? That's the discussion we're going to be having. So the SDGs gives us a framework that we can work with. And lastly, I'd wish to reflect on Sustainable Development Goal number 17, which talks about partnerships for the goals. So what really this tells us is that we can hardly achieve silos, but it is key that we work in partnerships and we collaborate. With that said, colleagues, we know that in South Africa, we suffer the triple challenge of unemployment, inequality, as well as poverty. So this particular framework does present to us how we can get ourselves from this triple challenge that underpins the South African society. On the one hand, we're going to look at a policy landscape, survey the policy landscape, try to understand if there's really anything wrong with the policies that we have, or whether the issue is a quintessential problem that South Africa has of developing excellent policies that don't necessarily always get implemented. So we're going to explore that particular issue. Just to frame the discussion, we have major microeconomic challenges. Our debt to GDP ratio is unenviable. Our trade deficit account, or rather our trade account, in terms of our exports and our imports, is in the deficit because we import far more than we export. If you look at our institutions, as we will touch on later, you find that there's excellent research that is going on. So, and such research is of course funded by public money in terms of our taxations. So where are we going wrong? It is the point that we're going to want to explore. We've already spoken about the triple challenge of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. So what we really would like to see, if you segment the economy of South Africa, you find that the major segments of the economy goes to industries such as mining. So we've got a commodity grip where we don't even beneficiate, but we send stuff abroad to be turned into final product. Innovation of local, that originates locally, presents to us an excellent opportunity to pull ourselves from the commodity grip, as well as drive the knowledge economy, which is really what the 21st century economies are predicated on around the world for countries that are competitive and successful. So let's note that innovation presents us with an excellent intersection of science and technology, as well as trade and industry. So in other words, we do really want to harness our capacity to innovate, which will help us create jobs and alleviate poverty and all the other challenges that we spoke about of inequality, as well as poverty. So what are the relevant policies that are in place that pertains to innovation in the pharmaceutical industry? The major ones is the White Paper on Science and Technology, followed by the National Industrial Policy Framework. If we unpack them just a little bit, starting with the White Paper on Science and Technology, colleagues, you will all appreciate that we have just gone past the first iteration, not the first iteration, but the 2008 to 2018 iteration of the White Paper. And at the moment, we are on a new White Paper on Science and Technology. So the policy objective really of the science and technology that houses the policy of South Africa as far as innovation, science and technology is concerned. The objective is to promote the rate and quality of technology transfers from science, engineering, and technology institutions for widespread use in the business and government sectors. So the idea is that when we innovate, we should do so but not only leave the innovations at the stage of publications in peer-reviewed journals, but they ought to find expression in the market by our businesses being able to pull from our institutions that are research-driven. So the policy instruments is the 10-year innovation plan, the National Biotechnology Strategy for South Africa, as well as the National Research and Development Strategy. So by the look of things at this point, colleagues, I'd venture off to suggest that you will see that we have a solid plan in place. The question that we asked at the beginning is, where are the gaps from us leveraging on all of this excellent provisions that has been made? So in terms of the previous iteration of the white paper, the policy outcomes, or rather, just in general terms, the policy outcomes that we desire in terms of the national system of innovation is that we have put structures in place, we have put policies in place, we have put agencies in place. So if you look at the agencies that are in place to support the national system of innovation, we've got TIA, we've got NRF, we've got the NIPMO. These are institutions that has been in existence for quite a while. And it is important that we begin to ask questions as to what traction has given expression to the policy intent. Of course, from the white paper, there's also the bioeconomy strategy, which is quite pertinent at this point, where we are battling a pandemic. What we have set out to do as South Africa is to be well established in the area of biopharmaceuticals and biotechnology in general. So hence there was an initiative called Pharma to Pharma. So the research chairs as part of the NRF system, the National Research Foundation, focus on drug discovery, sciences, chronic diseases, animal biotechnology, and industrial biotechnology. Colleagues, if you look at this, at this plan, taking it 10, 20 years ago, you will realize that the vision was excellent in the context of the pandemic. However, how much progress did we make? What is it that is stopping us from making progress? I'd wish to share with you some of the research activities that takes place at some of our institutions. I'm mentioning here the VETS, the area of focus. They've got VETS Advanced Drug Delivery Platform. UCT, Professor Chibali will talk about H3D in a moment. UWC has got an institute that deals with microbial biotechnology and metagenomics. Stellenbosch has got an institution or an institute for plant-based biopharmaceutical expression systems. MRC is involved in a wide range of medical research, as is the CSIR. Colleagues, the question is two things. One, clearly there's a lot of activity that is going on. But how have we been able to measure the impact in terms of the market? The market does not suggest that we are this industrious when it comes to research and innovation activities. So where are we going wrong? What is the disjuncture between what we see in the market? We see products that originates from abroad. Very little that emanates from South Africa. So we do have a problem in a way, clearly. So if you look at the appraisal of the previous iteration of the white paper, you'll find that the systems and the institutions that we spoke about are in place. We have incentive schemes for industry to want to innovate or to partner with innovation institutions. But the uptake of such incentive schemes is very low. it's being argued that because it's cumbersome and the red tape is onerous. If you look at publications that emanate from South Africa, you will find that we publish excellent papers in excellent peer-reviewed scholarship. But that is pretty much the sum total of our research endeavors and the output thereof. So there is suboptimal collaboration between society, government, business, and academia. With that said, we do have structures, we do have institutions, we do have agencies, we do have strategies, we do have policies. But where do we go wrong? In conclusion, colleagues, it is my considered view that there's a trust deficit that undermines us realizing our strategic goals in terms of using innovation that is an intersection between science as well as industry. The country also lacks an overarching strategic plan that sets direction for the development of the pharmaceutical sector, which is essentially our problem. We are not pulling in one direction wherein we are able to harness our efforts. We work in silos. So I just also wish to say, based on the previous slide that I shared about the areas of focus that takes place in South Africa, let's for a moment consider a situation whereby an innovation that emanates from South Africa, that is a breakthrough to an unmet medical need, that ought by all accounts to be taken to a global market. I just want to come back and align with the topic of today regarding protection of IP rights. We will realize that it is in the best interest of South Africa as we are asserting ourselves and as we are wanting to make progress as far as innovation is concerned, to address the crises that we have in terms of a health crisis and an economic crisis. We then realize that it is in our best interest that as we have developed this breakthrough innovation technology, either by way of a pharmaceutical or by way of a medical device or a diagnostic, we need to adequately protect it in terms of intellectual property rights, so that the residual value can be retained in South Africa, particularly because Professor Chibali will be talking in a moment. Imagine it's a discovery from H3D at UCT. Since the universities are funded by our tax money, it makes sense for us as a nation to benefit from such innovation by way of protecting our intellectual property rights. So I think with this remarks, as we get into the Q&A, it will give us an opportunity to explore various topical issues at the moment, amongst them being the waiver for intellectual property rights for the vaccines that we are reliant on in terms of the coronavirus. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your attention. These are the thoughts I had wanted to share with you this afternoon. I thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Am I
Thank you, sir.
on? Am I back on? Thanks, Godfrey.
Thank you, sir.
Later on, I'm going to, clearly from what you have said, there's a lot that still needs to be done. And one would want to know how you see the government, the country's research in the pharmaceutical industry working together in order to collaborate to maximize innovation in South Africa. But please sit back and think of that question, and I'll get back to you later. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite to the podium, the virtual podium, of course, the University of Cape Town's Dr. Kelly Chibale, founder and director of Africa's first integrated drug discovery and development center, H3D. Professor Chibale was recently chosen as one of the world's top 60 inspirational leaders in the pharmaceutical industry. His H3D team is widely described as dynamic, committed, and global, with staff members drawn from South Africa, the African continent, and indeed globally. As you address us, Kelly, please tell us what has inspired the establishment of H3D. What is the drive behind the belief that your venture would stay the course and become a sustainable source of innovation and collaboration? How do you see H3D inspiring further drug development and innovation on the African continent? And to what extent would you say respect for intellectual property rights lies at the foundation of H3D's success? Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Bada. Can you?
I can certainly hear you, I can see you, and I can see your slide.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our story. And thank you, Bada, for the very, very kind introduction. I think you posed several questions that I think we'll be able to deal with during the question and answer session. My task right now is to share with you in the next 15, 20 minutes about our story in terms of how we innovate, discovering potential medicines, and how we have done it. And I think you will see in my presentation that the recurring theme will be partnerships. So this is the outline for my presentation. I will kick off and introduce H3D, and then I'll move on to the second section, which is telling you how different pharmaceutical companies that we have partnered with have contributed to building the organization that it is today, H3D. And then I will summarize what have been our achievements so far and finish off on where we stand with intellectual property. So what about H3D? So this is a University of Cape Town Drug Discovery and Development Center that was established officially in 2010, but really got going with the scientific programs, the research and development programs, in April of 2011. It's an integrated platform, and you will see what I mean by integration. It's having all of the necessary disciplines and platforms that allow you to move from the laboratory to the patient. So we're currently in 3 places across the University of Cape Town campus. So we have the chemistry team up on upper campus of the University of Cape Town. To your left is the building with the abbreviation IDM, which stands for Institute of Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine. That's where we have the biology lab. And then just below the Table Mountain, Grootskia Hospital, in the Department of Medicine is where we have pharmacology and our drug metabolism group. So the integrated nature of H3D, I think, is best captured on this slide. So this is what I mean by an integrated platform. Discovering a medicine requires the integration of multiple disciplines that prosecute a project from the lab to the patient. It's a team-based effort. So what we have by way of platforms is broadly the chemistry platform. which consists of the medicinal chemistry component, synthetic chemistry aspects, as well as the computer-aided drug design, or CAD, as we call it. Then to your right, you will see the biology platform. And I emphasize biology. There is a difference between biology and screening. So screening is one thing, biology is another. So we have malaria biology, again, the biology really reflecting disease biology in terms of the therapeutic areas that we work in. So we work in malaria, we work in TB, and much more recently set up an antimicrobial resistant or so-called antibiotic resistant microbial screening facility to look for new antibiotics. And in support of our target-based drug discovery programs, we have an enzymology platform established a few years ago to support our drug discovery programs. At the bottom of the screen is a very important platform, very generic, irrespective of the disease area that one is working in. And that's our drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics platform, or DMPK, drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics. This is about what the human body will do to the medicine. So we need to understand that and front load those studies much early on in the drug discovery process. So we have a suite of in vitro assays, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, or ADME as we call it as the abbreviations. So these are assays that allow us to understand not just the physical chemical properties of the molecules that we're developing, but also understand at an early stage what the human body is likely to do to the drug. We do our own rodent pharmacokinetics in rats and mice. We also have a platform for identifying metabolites when the drugs come into contact with, whether it's liver systems or in vivo in a rodent. So we can understand what the molecule is being transformed into as it goes through these systems here. And much more recently, building on the drug metabolism platform is this African drug metabolism platform that is really about developing a preclinical tool that will allow us to understand how the African patient population metabolizes medicines. So we can optimize the doses for the African patient population, which is genetically so diverse. Africa is arguably the most genetically diverse continent on planet Earth. So we need to understand how the African patient population metabolizes drugs so that in the early stages of the discovery process, we can prioritize small molecules based upon their predicted pharmacological profile in African patients. So very, very important platform that we have been developing for the last couple of years or so. This is currently our infectious disease portfolio. We work currently in 4 main therapeutic areas. One is malaria. The second one is tuberculosis, TB. The third one is antimicrobial resistance, AMR. And much more recently, actually this year, we added COVID to our portfolio, where we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning, coupled with virtual screening to identify starting points for COVID-19 therapeutics. In terms of partnerships, already you could see this from the title of my presentation. It's all about partnerships. You cannot do it alone. So we have a range of partners representing academic institutions, the innovative pharmaceutical companies, and product development partnerships. And you see the logos of the many partners that we work with on the various drug discovery programs. We're also, again, in the spirit of partnerships. We belong to two large international consortia, one in the field of malaria, the other one in the field of TB. So one is a malaria drug accelerator, which is composed of the institutions whose logos you see on this slide, working together with a couple of the pharmaceutical companies who are members of this consortium, deconvoluting the mechanism of action, trying to understand how malaria medicines work, to identify what we call targets for those drugs, and then using those mechanisms or that mechanistic insight to then mount or form drug discovery projects which are geared towards that specific mechanism. On the other hand, the TB drug accelerator is also an international consortium, just like the malaria drug accelerator is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the TB drug accelerator is composed of about 9 innovative pharmaceutical companies whose logos are displayed here, and a range of institutions, including H3D, working together in a pre-competitive drug discovery space, sharing resources, sharing expertise, and working together in early stage drug discovery to move projects towards the clinic. Very important in global health to really form these partnerships that are underpinned by projects that move forward into the clinic. I'm going to now switch to some slides where a section where I show you how the innovative pharmaceutical companies have been critical in the kind of institution or entity H3D has become in terms of building the critical infrastructure that is needed to do drug discovery. I'm going to kick off with where the journey really started. And that is when I took a sabbatical at Pfizer back in 2008. And this is when I was appointed, as Motibi was referring to, the South African Research Chairs Initiative, established by the government of South Africa to build drug discovery expertise and skills. So to prepare myself as a research chair in drug discovery, I took a sabbatical to go to Pfizer so I could understand and learn what it takes to establish a drug discovery organization at the level of infrastructure, at the level of technologies, and at the level of talent. And this sabbatical was made possible by my very good friend, Tony Wood, then with Pfizer, but now a senior vice president at GlaxoSmithKline. The second example of a very important partnership struck with an innovative pharmaceutical company is a partnership that we enjoyed with Novartis for at least 6 years. And that is continuing in different formats. But this program I'm sharing with you here is a very specific program that had several elements to it. And I'll just mention a few. In addition to funding that we received from the Novartis Research Foundation, over the 6-year period, almost $4 million of funding that came to H3D in Cape Town, some of which contributed to refurbishing state-of-the-art laboratories that we occupy today, was really, really significant. We're also partnered with Novartis at the level of addressing the gaps that we identified here in Cape Town. And we achieved this on 3 levels. We would second scientists from Cape Town to go to any of the Novartis sites, either in Cambridge in the US or in Basel in Switzerland, to pick up particular skills that they can then bring back to Cape Town. But we also address this from the perspective of hosting Novartis scientists who spent a sabbatical here in Cape Town with us as well. And of course, we have also been beneficiaries of the Novartis Next Generation Scientist program, which allowed our PhD students to spend a period of time either at the Novartis site in Basel or in Cambridge in the US. We have received several support from Novartis for our operations, project management, and helping us develop a de novo human resource system, which we actually have been using here at the University of Cape Town to manage performance. Because when you're doing drug discovery, you're not doing academic research. You are innovating. And the current systems that are available in academic institutions of learning do not cater for translational science or drug discovery or innovation. So we gotta create a new HR system that provides a performance management framework that recognizes the requirements for doing innovation. And then finally, we've had an R&D partnership with Novartis through the Novartis Institutes of Tropical Diseases in malaria and TB. The second example is a partnership with J&J, specifically with Janssen Pharmaceuticals. Again, very similar to the Novartis partnership. The one aspect of this partnership required us identifying specific gaps, including gaps in our actual projects, which provided opportunities for our scientists to spend a period of time at one of the J&J or Janssen sites. And what you see in the picture here is one of our drug metabolism scientists who spent a stint at the BS site of J&J or Janssen in Belgium to prosecute a specific project. And we had the same type of arrangement for the La Jolla site. We've also been a beneficiary of the new scientific discovery fellowships from Janssen, which is allowing some of our mid-career scientists to develop expertise in a very important area which represents a gap for H3D at the present moment, and that's in the area of toxicology. And finally, but not least, we've had J&J participating in our global health mentorship program of H3D and making available their senior scientists to a mentor our mid-career scientists here in Cape Town. The second example of industry partnership is with Merck. This is a Merck in Europe through the Merck Global Health Institute. So in addition to an R&D collaboration in malaria, we've also worked with Merck Global Health Institute to support scientists from other parts of Africa who are doing their PhDs in the field of drug discovery, working in my academic group, but also working very, very closely with H3D and making use of the H3D infrastructure to advance their projects. Finally, but not least, not to be outdone is the other Merck in the US. And we have been beneficiaries of a charitable donation from Merck, which has allowed us to develop specific assays that we are deploying in our African drug metabolism and disposition project. And this is a program that was funded last year, which has allowed us to develop specific assays that we are now using on the African drug metabolism project. And much more recently, and this year for that matter, we have another grant from Merck, from MSD, which has involved 4 fellows working with our communications and marketing team to professionalize the H3D service platform and really help us to develop it to world-class standard. So the examples I've shown you are really examples of the role the innovative pharmaceutical companies have been playing in building the capacity and infrastructure for H3D to prosecute world-class drug discovery. So what have we done so far? Anybody can talk, but what have we actually achieved so far. We've grown the organization from, I used to have 4 postdocs and maybe 17 PhD students back in 2011. This has grown now to more than 80 people, more than 65 in H3D, and the rest members of my academic group, all having access to the drug discovery infrastructure that we've developed. I showed you already, we've established technology platforms in chemistry, in biology, and in drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics. I've shown you already that we've established several drug discovery platforms in 4 infectious disease areas. But also, we've been successful in getting a project that we led in partnership with other players internationally that went from the lab to the clinic. So we have a track record of getting a project to move from the lab to deliver a molecule that entered into human clinical trials up to phase 2, including developing a backup molecule that could replace the one that's in front. And finally, from what you've seen, we've assembled a global network of research partners and funders supporting our programs. The final slide I have is just a single slide on IP. I gave you the 4 therapeutic areas that we focus in. These are the unmet medical needs. I think when Bada was introducing the session, he was talking about unmet medical needs and innovation. Unmet medical needs need innovative solutions. And for that to be sustainable, you need IP. Even if you're working on malaria or TB, where the commercial returns are not obvious, IP is still important. Why is it important? First of all, it's not just a right. It becomes a responsibility. When you own the IP, you have a responsibility to the patient to move that IP forward to benefit the patient. But also, when you have secured IP, this is exactly why we've been successful in attracting funding from pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, is that when you secure IP or the pharma partner secures IP, there is freedom to operate because they are not going to be blocked from moving that innovation forward, even if it's just for malaria or TB. And because you own the IP, you can have a role to play in determining access of that medicine in disease endemic countries. IP is an enabler. It is very important and it must be respected because the benefits are enormous, both in terms of health, but also economic benefits. I'll finish off to just thank all the funders that have supported H3D since it was founded. You can see all of them here, pharmaceutical companies, and of course, a high net worth individual, Nevo Hisdale, who has been very generous in supporting the African Drug Metabolism and Disposition Project. Thank you so much for your attention. And I turn back to you, Bada, now for the rest of the discussions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. What you have just given us is a demonstration of the complete recipe of actions and infrastructure required for drug development and sustainable drug development. And this include, and I won't be able to enumerate all of them, collaboration, and that's collaboration within an institute among the various, such as you are doing at the University of Cape Town. It's also collaboration between the North and the South, and you've demonstrated how individual innovative pharmaceutical companies at different stages of the development of H3D have come in to assist and share ideas with yourselves. Licensing strategies, where your partners with IP have been called upon to voluntarily share their know-how and technology. funding, very important. And the involvement of students, that students get involved at the various stages of drug development. I think that's an achievement that we should all strive to achieve and emulate across our continent and indeed everywhere else in the developing world. You did give us all the ingredients that are required for such. And in fact, questions that make us ask, why then is it? So clearly there's something missing. What is it? And way or the other in innovation, in healthcare, and in trade and industry, we do have all sorts of initiatives that are get to where we should be, but where we clearly are not. Could it be that we need some kind of super ministry to coordinate all these efforts from the ministries? What do you think, Mutobi?
It's a very important question. Let me cite an example that works in South Africa. You'd be aware that we build some of the most sophisticated, luxurious cars in some of our plants here in the country, down in Durban, in East London, in Port Elizabeth, and some here in Pretoria. The industry, the automotive industry, has managed to get something right, and that being working in tandem with all the stakeholders up and downstream into a functioning ecosystem. So that's the one thing that they got right. They have an ecosystem that is responsive. The whole arrangement that they have is called Automotive Supply Chain Competitiveness Initiative. It has various segments of the industry that belongs to it. So you have government, you have organized business, you have labor, and then you have suppliers. So when you have a structure that is recognized, that sets its goals of what it wants to achieve, what level of competitiveness it wants to see the automotive industry in South Africa operating at, and developing strategies in terms of how that will actually come about. Monitoring that through M&E's metrics, that is the one way to go about that. So amongst the problems that we have is that we don't have a sector development plan, which ought to articulate a blueprint of how we need to go about our innovation endeavors. But it is heartening to see the account of the work that goes into H3D, and one does hope to achieve by 2030. Partnerships are crucially important. So there is no any other way that biopharma and mainstream pharma can develop adequately in South Africa unless there is that plan. So the plan that it had commissioned and execute some of the findings that there too. In fact, H3D had made an excellent contribution to the very same study. So there are a number of initiatives that takes place, but they are all in silo. It will be good to harness and work in tandem. It's also good to see VETS and UCT working together. Those being the two most prominent institutions in Africa.
Thanks. Kelly, back to you. It's clear is certainly an ideal to strive for. But will it be complete without self-sufficiency in APIs and other raw materials? What needs to be done to complete the picture of self-sufficiency for our continent, in your view?
Yeah, thank you, Bada. You know, one of the critical gaps in Africa is actually API manufacturing. And I'll give you a simple example. When we worked on that project that discovered this malaria drug that went into clinical trials, before 5 kilograms of good manufacturing practice material for clinical trials, we this in India. So why this is so important? Get innovators or pharma companies to waive IP on the COVID. To waive IP, it's another to have the ability to manage
Vaccines of all kinds, I think about 98% or so. Where do you see drug development and self-sufficiency in this regard in Africa 10 years from now? You first, Kelly.
Thank you. 10 years from now.
10 years from now, where would we be?
I first must state that I'm in concurrence with what Professor Chibali is saying. But I'd like to take a social perspective. There are human rights issues here to be considered. Because just think about a situation where the outbreak actually emanated from China and caused a major havoc to the supply chain to get the APIs here. Professor Chibali speaks about having taken 5 kilograms of raw mats to India. Was also just hardest hit by the virus. Then what happens next? If China and India can support, then we're going to have serious human rights issues. That's the perspective I want to take. Now, if you look at South Africa at the current moment, and you look at the Industrial Policy Action Plan, the IPAP, it does state that in the past 20 years or so, there has been massive closures of plants that manufactures medicines. So there has been quite a considerable erosion of manufacturing capacity. And yet, when you look at the frameworks that we have in place, you will not falter anything. So if you look at all the plans that are duly approved by the cabinet in terms of Section 85(2)(b) of the Constitution, which requires that the cabinet and the president must develop and implement policy. So the constitutional issues actually comes to the fore here, that to the extent that policies has been developed, but they are not implemented, and their non-implementation stands to put lives at risk, it becomes a travesty of justice. That's the perspective I'd like to come from. This is that critical. Otherwise, we will come across as an irresponsible country with an irresponsible government by deferring these matters for any longer. So in 10 years' time, one does hope that the lessons has been learned and that we do that which we need to do.
Thank you, Mato.
Thank you.
There's a question from the live stream. It's actually a request. Can we also have contact details of the presenters? If both of you, if the panelists agree that their contact details can be shared, then I will leave it up to the organizers. Way of ensuring that those who are interested in your details will have access to them.
Yes, Chair, I'm happy. I'm happy for my details to be given, my email address.
Thanks, Kelly. Motobi, that goes for you as well?
It does.
Both the diabetes and high blood pressure, we by the innovation funding. So this is something that should be taken into account, particularly by all the right buttons that they need to press in order to ensure support. And I suppose they would also need to make available their details for contacting. In conclusion, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is our nations will serve as examples of initiatives to be stepped up to ensure that our continent is ready in all respects for the next. Examples of how access to therapies, diagnostics, and vaccines for this and without placing in jeopardy the basis for innovation, intellectual property rights. To the audience, and profuse thanks to BioAfrica for organizing this extremely developed behind the scenes and which would otherwise go unnoticed. To our communities who look up to our scientists to come up with the solutions against these devastating pandemics.